Property Show. My name is David Xu and I'm here with
Azura Rahman.
Okay, today we are getting a flavor of the public sentiment towards the property market, good and also bad.
Absolutely. It's been a less tumultuous year in terms of prices, which is what everyone is always concerned about. But they've gone up by a fairly slow increase. And this is largely thanks to measures in loan restrictions, the RPGT, amongst other things, which has cooled down speculators at the very least.
Absolutely, because all also recently enhanced with the recent budget announcements on RPGT too, isn't it?
Yeah, and I found out a bit more when I spoke to Sean De Gregorio from iProperty.com about the Asia Property Market Sentiment Report for this year, for 2012, and that's been carried out recently, and we went over some interesting findings.
Okay, let's find out together.
Now, Sean, who are some of the respondents that you spoke to for this survey?
Well, we had almost 25,000 respondents right across the region, but more specifically within Malaysia. We had 11,000 respondents to this survey. So I think it's probably on that basis one of the largest property sentiment surveys that's been done.
Okay, and the interesting thing that I found about your respondents that a significant amount of them are property owners, up to a third owning one property and 43% owning two or more properties. And what does this indicate? Well,
it was quite amazing. That was one of the more interesting statistics to come out of the survey, was that, people increasingly see property as an available form of investment, an attractive form of investment, and those that have one or more properties want to continue to invest. So it bodes well for the property market.
Now, I guess that means kind of answers my next question. This driving desire to own property, is it just all related to investment, related to making more money?
I'd say it's absolutely about making more money. And excuse me, property in Malaysia is a very available place for people to invest their money. It's bricks and mortar. You can touch it, you can see it, you can feel it. You have some sense of control over what you're investing in. The housing market in Malaysia has been buoyant for a very, very long time. So it's become a very attractive place for people to invest.
I mean, one of the reasons why I asked that question is that, as it is in any market, there's always the grouse of rising property prices. Nobody ever makes complaints when the prices of property are going downwards, for example. But is this desire to own property as opposed to renting, is it something that's particularly Malaysian, or something that you also found similar across the region as well?
Oh, it's a very aspirational quality in a lot of countries in the region, no question. It's often the main investment that people will make in their lives. It's more often than not the biggest investment that people will ever make. But the aspiration for home ownership is certainly, a checkpoint as countries get wealthier. And Malaysia on its trajectory. Home ownership is more available today than it perhaps has ever been, albeit that prices are higher than they've ever been before. So you've got this interesting contradiction occurring where more and more people want to enter the market but are finding it harder and harder.
Now, how much are we looking to spend? How much are respondents hoping to spend on their property? Yeah,
look, our respondents fell in a demographic that was in the 30-somethings. Most people were in their 30s, employed obviously. And at that point in their lives when purchasing a home is front and centre on their priority list, most people, unsurprisingly, would like a landed property. But obviously they're more expensive, and most people were trying to find that landed property for under 500,000 ringgit, which is a bit of a challenge in and around KL.
That's interesting. That is a bit of a challenge, and in and around KL. Do you think that this will change in the future, in the sense that, as property prices go higher, there's this huge desire to buy landed property? Do you think that trend will change at some point?
I can't see it changing. I mean, both different styles of living have different advantages. Obviously, if you're in a complex, an apartment, for example, things like security, services, etc., are probably more apparent. But landed property, property or land goes up in value. Properties themselves tend to depreciate. So from an investment perspective, whether it's your first home or your second or third or fourth home, a landed property still makes the most sense. However, you do see in some parts of KL pretty significant price fluctuations in those landed properties because they're so attractive, and they do tend to bounce around a bit.
Right, okay. Now, in terms of, I guess, the figures kind of show as well, in terms of the trend for liking landed property, 57% of Malaysians actually occupy a landed property. Does it mean it's also just simply because of the way we've been living for so long?
Well, the beauty about Malaysia compared to some of its near neighbours is space. There is a lot of space in this country. There is room, and the spread of KL is an example of that. So there is space, and people like space. And in Malaysia, people are very fortunate that that's an option.
Right.
And I think it's definitely a cultural thing. It's definitely something that's, been ingrained into society, and people want to hold on to that. But the problem being that the price of that is becoming very, very difficult for most people to get.
Okay, we'll talk a bit more about price in the second half of the interview, but before that, you're talking about the amount of space that Malaysia has, but despite the fact of the abundance of properties that we have in our market, one of the more interesting questions that you've asked our respondents is their intention to invest abroad. What were some of your findings there?
Well, we're starting to see more and more Malaysians look abroad,
right,
for a number of reasons. Out of the survey basically told us that some are looking as a long-term immigration platform.
Right.
Many Malaysians study overseas and like the idea of owning property in overseas markets. But you're also spreading your risk a bit. If investing in property is what you like to do, then it makes a fair bit of sense to spread your risk. Now, that can be buying properties inside or outside of KL, but increasingly in countries near the region, and particularly in countries that English language is available, they're accessible, and you can travel to them relatively easily. So places like Singapore and Australia came up very high in the survey as destinations.
Mm-hmm. And also, I guess at the same time, we've got a lot of property developers who've been quite aggressive in trying to lure buyers from Malaysia at the same time. Hasn't that been, Sean?
Well, Malaysians are increasingly seen as, I won't say targeted, but certainly focused on for developers in other markets. You know, if you look at some of the data coming out of the UK, where 1 in 10 properties is now being bought from a foreign investment perspective by a Malaysian.
Yeah.
You've got specific developers in cities like in Melbourne, where whole apartment blocks will be targeted at Malaysian investors. So word's out that Malaysians like property, and more developers are developing products that suit that investment profile in cities that Malaysians like to visit.
I suspect those buyers are not concerned about increasing house prices in Malaysia then, Sean.
Probably not high on their list of concerns.
Right, okay, we'll be talking a bit more about the concerns right after the break. I'm speaking to Sean De Gregorio, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of iProperty Group on The Property Show, BFM 89.9.
Bring forth money. BFM 89.9.
It's Azura Rahman on The Property Show, and I'm speaking to Sean De Gregorio, and he is the Chief Executive Officer of iProperty Group. And we're talking about the Asia Property Market Sentiment Report 2012 that's just been distributed by iProperty. Now, what were some of the key concerns of the respondents that you spoke to?
Price.
Prices, obviously.
was the number one. Price will always top the list, along with location, as the sorts of things that people want. One of the big emerging concerns, though, was, majority of our respondents are looking toward the government to do more to arrest what they see as an affordability issue, both around giving them greater access to finance, things like tax deductions on loans. Really, the underlying theme was that people want the government to step in and do more to address this issue of affordability.
Now, in terms of prices, though, does the sentiment match reality? How are we doing for rising house prices, Sean?
On a regional basis, Malaysia is still seen as a very attractive place to buy property. It's still relatively cheap compared to a lot of the other options within the region. So I know sometimes it's easy to forget that, or perhaps not appreciate it because it's not altogether relevant. But on a regional basis, Malaysia is still seen as terrific value for people. And the government have done a very, very good job of marketing Malaysia to foreign investors.
Right.
Through the Malaysia My Second Home program, through making it a very easy country to come and live and work in. So there is a lot of conundrums, I guess, in Malaysia being an increasingly attractive place. But at the same time, affordability is still pretty good.
Right.
All things considered.
And increasing house prices, they haven't jumped too terribly from year on year compared to the previous year, haven't they?
No, the last 12 to 18 months have certainly been flatter. The market had a very good run, blipped around 08-09, recovered in 2010. But what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is certainly a dampening at the top end of the market.
Right.
The top end of the market has definitely slowed, and there's no question. What we have seen, though, is an increase in volume in the 250 to 450 category, and that's more people actively buying and selling in that price bracket. And that's probably a far more realistic price bracket for many Malaysians versus the top end of the market. So we're also seeing, in concert with that, property developers shift their focus away from the top end and toward that low to sort of middle income bracket where most people are buying and selling houses.
Right, okay. Does it just mean that also that the speculators are now moving on to the lower end of the market, though?
Well, look, there's very little you can do about speculators. They will absolutely follow the market, and they will move to where they see opportunity, and you can expect them to to get into that part of the market now.
Right. Now, despite the fact of this concerns, there has been things, like you mentioned, measures that's been done by the government in terms of loan-to-value ratio, and also recently we saw that the RPGT has been tweaked, so to speak, from 10 to 15% for properties sold within 2 years and 5 to 10% for properties sold between 2 and 5 years during the recent budget. Do you think that in particular would help in stopping to accelerate the price hike?
Marginally.
Right.
Remember that the real capital gains tax is a tax on profit. So, if someone's paying that, they've made money. They've flipped a property and they've speculated and made money. Speculators do very little in terms of creating wealth or building houses, but they're a fact of life.
Right.
But measures introduced were a good sign, but in practical terms, we don't think it will have too much of an effect on the market.
Now, in terms of affordability, though, affordability and rising house prices are actually two essentially very different things. It depends on how much money you have and what kind of basket of goods you're spending on, essentially, isn't it, Sean? So I was just wondering whether, in terms of affordability, do you think that there'll be more developers who develop property outside of Greater KL, for example, and, whether with the increase in transport links, we'll actually see a trend of people buying houses that are more affordable but perhaps away from urban areas?
Well, I think it's inevitable. You're right, infrastructure will help fringe areas become more accessible, and you'll see people move to those areas purely from an affordability perspective. Affordability is an issue in Malaysia. If you think about wages versus cost of housing, Malaysia still comes in as a more affordable market than most.
Right.
That said, you're seeing price appreciation, and so long as salaries and wages rise at a lower rate, then you open up an issue. But the more infrastructure, the more transport that can be provided to fringe areas, definitely you will see developers take up those opportunities, and you'll most definitely see people buying properties that are serviced that way.
Okay. Now, apart from affordability and rising house prices, what were some of the other concerns of your respondents?
Oh, look, an emerging concern, I guess, is also around the government ensuring that property developers, for example, are bona fide. And that when you put down your deposit and you wait 2 years, that at the end of that 2 years, you actually do get a property in return. And that's an emerging concern.
Right.
The property development industry is a huge industry in this country, and there are many, many players and many, really very good property developers. And a property developer's success really has a lot to do with the next project they do. So they're not in the business of building bad developments. However, there will always be an element of property developers that perhaps aren't as good as the rest, and there is a growing concern amongst consumers that they want the government to guarantee the validity of property developers and make sure that people aren't losing deposits, and also that you're seeing fewer and fewer abandoned property developments. So there was more money to, I guess, finish those abandoned developments and try and open up more stock that way. So an increasing focus on property developers from a consumer perspective.
Do you think that we're responding quickly enough to these concerns?
Look, it's a chicken and egg. I mean, you obviously want more property developers building more properties in the country because it's, supply is a key factor in price. And the more that comes on the market, the better it is for consumers. So you want an active property developer market. You don't want to kill it.
Right.
By being too heavy-handed. So it's a balancing act. But I think the government have the right intent. But again, the effectiveness of these policies will be the real bellwether over the next 12 months.
Okay, now, Sean, seeing how the market is behaving and with the budget out of the way, we need to do some crystal ball gazing on your part. What do you think would be the likely sentiment would be for the first half of 2013? It's been quite positive for this half for 2012. Do you think that would change in any way?
Look, I think the sooner the election can be had, the better, because it does cause a little bit of uncertainty, and that's bad for the markets.
Right.
Having said that, we're seeing just a cautious optimism being maintained. But it is a cautious optimism. I think people see that the heat has gone out of the market and are probably pleased about that. And you might have sort of, normal service returning to the property market where returns are a bit lower, but there's maybe a little less speculation and a little more certainty, but you're unlikely to see these enormous property price returns continue, and that's stopped anyway.
Right.
So we see the next half, or the first half of 2013 as steady as she goes.
Right.
Get the election out of the way, and just bring back some certainty to the market.
Okay. Do you think, from your respondents' point of view, though, does it mean that they're a bit more cautious with buying properties for now? They're holding out for the election first in case there's any policy changes, perhaps?
I don't think they're expecting any dramatic policy changes, and we've seen the volume of properties being bought and sold maintained, albeit that at a lower average price.
Right.
So we're seeing more properties at a lower price being turned over in the market. So there is still activity, no question. but there is cautious optimism. I think the expectation of enormous returns is probably gone. And the sooner the election is had and done, and people can get back to some certainty for a number of years, I think that'll be a good thing.
Okay, and that's Sean Di Gregorio, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of the iProperty Group on The Property Show, BFM 89.9.